don't see him up there. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Peter Wanders. I'm the president and CEO of Anderson Ranch, and I am thrilled to have all of you here on behalf of Sue Hostetler, our board of directors, and our staff. This is what we love to do. We want to get people together. We want to talk about making art, and then we want to get you up in the studios to make art. So please, when you're here, wander around campus a little bit. It is a super exciting week. If you haven't noticed, it is our recognition week. The Guerrilla girls started us out with a seminar the last few days. They're our first public lecture today. But we have events throughout the week. The staff can give you more details or give you a little pocket guide. But we'd be really excited to have you join us and support us in some really, really fantastic conversations this week. A really quick note about what makes this all possible. The incredible lifetime support of Toby Devin Lewis. Many of you know Toby. She was the director of the Progressive Collection, really helped launch a lot of young arts careers. So having her part of this, this program is really exciting for us. She is joined by Oolite Arts. Oolite Arts out of Miami, again, really promotes and helps grow young artists. So we are, again, thrilled with a synergy of having them here as sponsors. Coldwell Banker is a sponsor for us throughout the year. For this series, Lugano hosted a little Prosecco cart outside. If I could have switched that to hot chocolate at the last minute, I might have, but if it warms up a little.
So that got projected onto the facade of the Whitney Museum the very night it reopened after its extensive remodeling. And it was interesting because a lot of people in the street thought that it was something that the museum wanted to do.
Okay, well, this brings us to
why we're here tonight.
That. Why we're here tonight, one of the reasons. Okay, what art historians call the male gaze, we call the male graze. All those naked women all over the world in museums and art museums, are they just luscious patterns of color and texture? Or is there more going on? What are they doing? What's being done to them? Why are they naked?
Sexual exploitation, domination, abuse, and voyeurism are everywhere in our culture. But when these themes get aestheticized, the discussion seems to stop. The male gaze isn't about censoring artworks or condemning sexuality as immoral. It's about facing the fact that Western art is and has been obsessed with female bodies, sex, and violence.
Okay, you know the art, but do you know the artist? Lots of male artists have exploited and abused women in their real lives. Does that bad behavior find its way into their work? To have a deeper understanding of art in our culture, we decided to look at art and artists straight on, because in the age of Me Too, there's no going back.
Did Lucian Freud really do all of this?
Had 14
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Never saw many of his children until he wanted them to model for him. Got mad with one daughter when she refused to let him paint her 6-year-old daughter, his granddaughter, naked. Fathered 3 children by 3 different women, all in the same year. Said women go downhill after the age of 16. Had 4 children by a former student, never saw any of them, then wrote all of them out of his $62 million will. Who was really shortlisted by the Turner Prize? Turner was a cheapskate all his life. He never paid housekeepers who lived with him, took care of him, had sex with him, and bore his children. Late in life, he freeloaded at a boarding house run by his mistress. When he died, he cut all of them out of his will, including the children he had ignored. But he left a small fortune in unsold paintings to support impoverished artists and to keep his name alive. This became the oh-so-prestigious Turner Prize. What did Picasso do after François Gillot left him? Cried? Nah. But he refused to see his children, found himself an even younger woman, and ruined Gillot's career by pressuring galleries not to show her work.
These artists were said to be violent to their wives, but only one actually stood trial for her murder, Carl Andre.
Helping museums write wall labels. Today, many individuals are bravely speaking out, and we've heard rumors of discussions going on in museums about whether or not an artist's behavior should be disclosed in any explanation of his art. We have some ideas about that.
To set the stage, here is the official portrait of President Bill Clinton hanging in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., painted by an artist who, like Clinton, has been accused of sexual abuse. What should the portrait gallery say about this interesting coincidence?
3 ways to write a museum wall label when the artist is a sexual predator.
Number 1, don't mention it at all. Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation and the inventor of a new kind of portraiture consisting of patterns of color.
Number 2, mention it a little bit. Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation and the creator of a new portraiture consisting of patterns of color. Like many artists, he has had a few disgruntled models and employees.
Number 3, be straight up honest. Chuck Close has had a huge career with prices to match. He has been accused of sexually abusing models and students he picked up at fancy art schools. How fitting and ironic that he painted the official portrait of Bill Clinton. The art world tolerates abuse because it believes art is above it all and that rules just don't apply to genius white male artists. Wrong.
And the art school art world confidential. Young students, horny professors. Hooking up with students is not okay anymore, but we all know it still happens. Schools have been slow to respond to complaints and oftentimes negligent.
In our new project, The Male Grays, which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, themalegrays.com, you can check this so much more out and put your own comments in. We tell stories of art professors creating hostile conditions in class, preying on their young students to have sex with them, impregnating them, then keeping their jobs, but getting rid of any female faculty that get in their way. And administrators who pimped for male professors, paid for the silence of pregnant students, or just did nothing.
And it doesn't stop even after art school. The art world is a hierarchy of mostly men at the top who continue this bad behavior or look the other way when their colleagues engage in it.
What did the Museum of Modern Art in New York do when it came out that its board president gave convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein $200 million and was then accused of sexual abuse himself?
Basically, nothing. Leon Black, billionaire, big-time collector, owner of Phaidon Art Press, gave $40 million to the Museum of Modern Art. Despite all the dirt that came out on him, he's still on the board, although no longer chairman, and there's still a gallery named after him. And he has remained mum on his connections to Jeffrey Epstein.
And there's more. A young Russian single mother has claimed that Black trapped her for years in an abusive sexual relationship through manipulation, threats, and coercion. Black said it was consensual and said the money he lent her was to buy her silence. She says otherwise and recently sued him for defamation. She also reported that Black sexually abused other women as well.
So we put this message to Leon Black and Glenn Dubin, another Epstein pal and MoMA's board, on a phone booth just outside the museum. And it reads, "Advice to the Museum of Modern Art about big donors with big ties to Jeffrey Epstein. MoMA should kick Black and Epstein off its board immediately, cover their names on the galleries, and put up labels explaining why."
And of course, we'd be happy, since we love writing wall labels, to help them with any wall labels they need.
And of course, on themalegrays.com, which again, we hope you all visit after this presentation, we invite any and all of you to comment, tell your story, or mend your way with an apology.
When Art Night London asked us to create billboards in 11 UK cities, all of which are up now, we decided we wanted to ask everyone, and certainly all of you here today, to help us wherever you go. Go to your favorite museum, count the number of naked women in the artworks, and then count the number of women artists on the walls. These are a whole bunch of half of our 12 billboards, which are up right now all over the UK.
There's one of them that's just traveling around the countryside. Anyway, it asks everyone to tally up the results, post them on our page for everyone to see and to think about. And we hope that this will change the way we look at art forever.
Several years ago, the Guerrilla Girls gave our first commencement address at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, in front of thousands of students and quite a few angry parents. Afterwards, we decided to turn our crazy speech into a video.
The Guerrilla Girls Guide to Behaving Badly, which you have to do most of the time in the world as we know it.
Be a loser. The world of art doesn't have to be an Olympics where a few win and everyone else is forgotten. The art market and its hyper-competitive celebrity culture makes everyone but the stars feel like failures. But there's another world out there that's not about raging egos, a world of artistic cooperation and collaboration. That's the one we joined, and we invite you to join it too. Let's make trouble together.
Be crazy. Political art or activism that points to something and says this is bad is just preaching to the converted. Instead, try to change people's minds and do it in some unforgettable way. A trick we learned is humor helps you fly under the radar. If you can get people who disagree with you to laugh at an issue, you have a hook right into their brain. Once there, you have a much better chance to convert them.
Be anonymous. Sometimes you gotta speak out publicly, but sometimes it works even better to speak out anonymously. Now this has its disadvantages, like working your whole life without getting any credit, but it has lots of advantages too. Our anonymity, for example, keeps the focus on the issues and away from our personalities. The mystery of who we might be draws lots of attention to the issues we promote. Plus, you won't believe what comes out of your mouth while wearing a gorilla mask.
Be an outsider. Even if you're working inside the system, we say act like an outsider. Seek out the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. Then expose it. Jam your culture. Remake your institution.
Just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't, do another anyway. Don't be paralyzed if you don't get it right every time. Just keep chipping away. We promise that bit by bit, your efforts will add up to something effective.
Artists, don't make only expensive art that billionaire art collectors can afford. Curators, don't exhibit only the expensive art your trustees donate. Let's have more cheap art that everyone can own, like books, zines, music, and movies, like our posters.
Show museums tough love. It's unethical that wealthy art collectors who invest lots of money in art can become museum trustees, overseeing institutions that in turn validate their investments. It's a lousy way to write and preserve our history.
Demand ethical standards inside museums. No more conflicts of interest or insider trading. No more cookie-cutter collections of art that cost the most. Convince art collectors their collections are inferior with only work by white male artists. Don't let museums perpetuate this version of art and power with a few tokens thrown in. Make sure your favorite museum casts a wider net and collects the whole story of our culture.
Whether you work in a museum or a classroom, don't teach an art history constructed by corrupt institutions. Do like we did. Write your own.
Complain, complain, complain. Be a creative complainer. Be a professional complainer. Don't assume people know what's missing from museums. Remind them how many modern and contemporary art collections still contain less than 15% females and artists of color.
Use the F word, feminism. We think it's crazy that so many people who believe in the tenets of feminism are still afraid to call themselves feminists. Feminism doesn't get the respect it deserves. Women's rights, civil rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights, and Black Lives Matter are the great human rights movements of our times.
Feminists like us who believe in intersectionality fight for all human rights. No one is free until everyone is free.
Feminism is changing the world. It's revolutionizing human thought, giving many people lives their great-grandparents could never have imagined. But there's still so much work to do. There are so many countries worldwide where LGBTQ people and women have little or no human rights.
90% of transgender employees have faced discrimination or harassment at work. In the US, no federal law protects them, even though nearly 80% of voters support such a law. Then there's rampant sexism in the tech industry, including the harassment of female gamers. And what about the gender earning gap that the US Congress refuses to move against?
Violence and abuse against women, gay, and transgender people is still a huge international problem. From gang rape in India to kidnappings in Nigeria to sexual slavery by ISIS to the negligible punishment given out for domestic violence in America. Trans women are assaulted and even murdered in the US.
But despite all this bad news, feminist resistance movements are exploding all over the world. Let's make the F word feminism the F word for the future. Let's all join together with feminists on the right side of history.
Okay. Well, that's it for our presentation this afternoon, but we would like to hear from you. So now is your time to ask us questions. You can stand up and rant or complain, whatever. So please.
Hi, and thank you. I'm curious if you have been subject to folks, trying to find out who you are so that you can be intimidated.
Sure, but we're not intimidated.
Hi, I would also just like to say that we elected Donald fucking Trump, and he met his wife through Jeffrey Epstein. And, you know, we as women have, you know, we're having children, and I think there is a really lost generation that's having a huge influence on this kind of divisiveness. Can you help us with also raising our voice? I mean, your message is so amazing. And I just feel like there's somehow getting the point into the parenting world, because it is part, the education world. I am seeing the shifts from when I was educated to now. It's progress. It's not perfect. But, there's still this very difficult place of raising little people. I guess that's it. Thanks.
I've got it. Is there any museum that you can identify through your online questionnaire that's doing a good job?
Oh, this questionnaire we just showed? Well, this project just launched last week. So we don't have any great statistics at the moment, but if you watch that space, we will have those. But as to museums, there are many wonderful people inside museums who are trying to push this rock up a hill and collect the real story of our culture, collect much, much more art by many, many different kinds of people, and show it in their museums. They're hampered by a couple of things. A, they're stuck with their collections, which were always, mostly known artists, mostly white male artists. So they have a real problem there, because one of their missions is to, uphold the value, not the value, but the attention on the work they actually have. So it's always a little bit further, a little bit, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But it definitely is happening. And we know there are museums that have shown many more artists of color and also have tried to raise the number in the collection, and for women too. One of those is Tate Modern in London. There are many in many, many other places, and it takes time and it's hard. You got to turn those big ships around. We want to do it. We know other people want to do it. But what they really need is outside pressure. That helps.
What do you think now that because the auction prices are so high on male artists, I feel like the art houses and the museums are looking more to female counterparts of that generation to fill in the gap for collectors. But it doesn't actually feel like they're really looking at it from a perspective from an artist. It just feels like it's kind of woke, like this is in style to look at women artists to fill that gap, or the wives of men that you showed lots of them and their artwork. What do you think about that?
Well, you also have to think about artists of color. I think the challenge is to separate museums from the art market. And curators, although with the institutional structure that we have, where the money all has to come from philanthropy rather than from any public sources, it's inevitable that there are going to be people who want to be on the boards because they've given money to the museum. I think that it's a courageous curator, and there are some, maybe even in this room, who have bucked that system and said that the most expensive art might not be the most significant. And museums are supposed to deal with cultural significance, not value, monetary value.
Cultural significance changes a lot. We have different ideas about that today than we did years ago, and there will be different ideas about that. So if museums are not collecting as much as possible of our culture today, 100 years from now, people will look at a museum and they'll have a totally different understanding of our culture than we know is out there. And just an aside, the most popular art in the United States, there are different art worlds, is street art. I mean, if you Google street art, you'll find millions and millions of artists. You can see them online, and of course, you can see them on the street. And of course, the art world has discovered many of them, and they are able to get, mega prices. But in general, you cannot stop artists from working. Don't wait for somebody to tell you that your work is worth something. Continue to do it. And luckily, artists can't stop making art. So they do it no matter what the odds are. And that's why we have so much great art out there.
I'm from DC, and we have several museums there that have executive directors that are female. Melissa Chu at the Hirshhorn and Dorothy Kaczynski at the Phillips, certainly Kim Sayat at NPG, and most recently, Kaywin Feldman was appointed the first female at the National Gallery. And I'm wondering, with all these women in such a prominent position and in the capital of the country, whether you're seeing any progress and interest in moving forward with your mission.
Well, Dorothy Kaczynski has done a lot of really interesting programs. But I think that the institutional structure is just really difficult to buck. And I think it's more than the director who can change that. And until museums really radically reimagine what they can be, it's going to be hard to pin it on a single person. There has to be the understanding that museums as they are right now are fast becoming obsolete, and that they really need to think about who they represent and how they represent them.
Thank you for your wonderful creative activism and your work. I'm just wondering what your reaction or thoughts about interventions relating to the recent news that Hunter Biden is being represented by an art dealer who's selling one of his paintings or something for $500,000, something like that?
Oh, it's about Hunter Biden he's selling his paintings for a lot of money. But I think they come with some kind of disclosure that whoever buys them is not allowed to approach the government from anything. We can't, yeah.
Paintings he painted?
Yeah. The onus is not on him, it's on the institution and whoever buys them. And there's so much attention has been given to it that, you just have to surveil it and watch it, and museums have to be careful.
Also, it's sad. I hear you can get a George Bush painting for a lot less.
Yeah.
Oh, may I speak?
Sure.
My question is about geography. The center of the art world was Paris, pre-war, then New York, somewhat shifted to LA. How do you think geography impacts our thinking, who's recognized, and where the power is in the art world?
All those distinctions are just based on money. They aren't based on much more. So there are many, many art worlds and many art world centers. So I wouldn't even talk about the geography of art.
If you want to feel better for a minute, many years ago we did a newsletter called Hot Flashes from the Guerrilla Girls. And for one of the issues, we investigated, we did like a weather report for museums around the country, and we discovered that the further away you get from New York, the more diverse the collections of the museums were. Now that doesn't mean they were hugely diverse, but it was kind of going in your direction out here. And I think the idea of saying that this is a center, that's a center, that's a center, is an outmoded idea. Because there have always been artists everywhere. They may be influenced by some things that they see, but there are great artists everywhere in every city, going their own way, doing their own work.
I thought it was on, but I guess it isn't. I had two questions. One is the focus on art festivals like Documenta or the Biennale, those type of profiles. Do you feel like those gatherings are a little bit different curated, or do you feel like it's the same thing going across those international festivals, national festivals for art? One, and two, ageism. Any opinions?
It's really hard to generalize about these things. Often a curator, each of those festivals has a curator each year, not the art fairs, that's different. It's just what the big galleries are selling and how easy it is to go to different cities to get more and more collectors to buy their stuff. But there are also, I just don't think there's any real point in generalizing about that. There are people trying to do better everywhere, and I know you all are aware there have been fantastic shows the last 8, 9, 10 years of Black artists, huge museum shows, all kinds of other artists. And in terms of ageism, the heartbreaking thing is that some of the shows by women are women who didn't live to be able to see them, something they would have wanted their whole life, like Emma Amos, a credible black artist who did really political work early on. She's been in some of the group shows you may have seen, like Soul of a Nation, but she also has a traveling retrospective in the United States right now, but never could see it because she died.
I guess I had a comment about, I don't know, it's just a lot of people have kind of touched on it, but I feel like, do you think that there's even a way to fully liberate the museum and art world culture when we live in a world that the art world is dictated by, like someone said, these art centers, which are predominantly white and rich centers? And do you think that the only way, I feel like, really to kind of have an equal and radical art world is to completely kind of abolish the idea of any type of institution that is what is upholding, like, what is the art world. So do you think, like, is that maybe something we could have, like, going back to times in which, like you showed, like, craft that Native people and indigenous peoples would make, and that was all art in their mind, but then we look at it now as, like, a craft, as something that's just necessarily, like, utilitarian, and, like, I guess I'm just wondering, do you think that the true way to maybe have this, like, this type of art space is to completely get rid of museums?
No, I think we should all create the art worlds we want to live in and not be subservient to the dominant art world if it isn't giving us a place or isn't giving us respect. I think that as the world gets larger and larger, and there are more and more artists, why should there only be one monolithic system? We've sort of invented our own way of surviving, and it's not through the art market, and you all have come here to see us today. We've never existed in that world. So those of you who dream of something else, go out and make it.
Can you speak a little bit to your creative process and how you balance sort of the irreverent nature of what I perceive you guys seeing in the world with a serious message and humor, and how you walk through that, and perhaps if it has changed at all over the course of the Guerrilla Girls, if you could speak to that as well. Thank you.
So the Guerrilla Girls were actually formed not to be a group sitting around talking, but to do street posters. And at the first meeting, we finished the first street poster. There was already this idea. And the idea was to use contemporary persuasive strategies like advertising, in-your-face strategies, to twist an issue around and come at it in a different way. And sometimes that's worked for us. It's often worked for us by using statistics and proving our case. It's often worked for us in other ways too. Humor has definitely helped. But there's always that nugget of information. Something strikes you. And a perfect example of that is our most known poster, Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Met Museum? If we had just put a headline of that poster, there aren't enough women artists in the Met Museum, we wouldn't be standing here today talking to you. Somehow we managed to come up with a totally new way to talk about this issue that so many people had been talking about without enough success. And one thing about it also is we combined it with a whole nother issue, the number of naked women in art, which we all know about. And comparing that to the lack of women artists really makes this poster unforgettable. And we dare any of you to go into a museum, I'm sure you've seen it already, but after the first time you saw it, and not think about what is on the walls and why. And we're always trying to dig deeper, to do something better. We have the possibility now of using any format we want. We do, giant banners as big as this room. We do huge exhibitions, and we really have a way to put stuff out there. There's never a time when we don't have some kind of exhibition where we don't get tons of responses from people saying, viewers, museum goers saying, I never knew about that before. So part of it is just getting that information out there and giving people, if they wish, the opportunity to look at it all a different way. And when you talk about wall labels, one thing about not connected to how art gets into a museum, the way wall labels are written, especially in Los Angeles, and if next time you go to Los Angeles, check this out. There's so many times when they'll have a big show of some famous, super successful artist. The introductory panel will say, and it was then that he became one of the best artists of his generation. And it says that about every single one. You know, and that is to us is not writing, helping people experience art on their own. Why do you have to know that it's valuable, know that it's important to access it?
I'm just wondering if you could comment at the recent passing of Wilhelmina Cole Holliday from the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., who was the founder of the museum and has done such an amazing job promoting women in the arts.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't realize that she had died, but we were always been asked about the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I don't believe it was really founded with a feminist point of view. However, it has been given that over time. It has evolved. And we're always asked how we feel about women being shown in their own museum. And my feeling was always, until we don't need museums like that, we need them. So anyway, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you everyone for coming. We'll see more of you this week.